A countdown just started, 48 hours. Open the strait, or the US engages Iranian power plants. But Iran's response was not another military threat. It was a threat to the water supply, the plants that produce 90% of Kuwait's drinking water, 70% of Saudi Arabia's, not a backup system. The actual water supply for tens of millions of people. But why did Iran choose water and not a military target? Well, let me explain. Disclaimer. Let us start with exactly what was issued today, because the language is precise and every word matters. The White House posted a statement today that read, in direct quotation, "If Iran does not fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first." That is not diplomatic language. That is not a back-channel signal or a carefully worded communique through intermediaries. That is a public countdown, posted directly, with a specific number of hours, a specific name target category, and a specific sequence, starting with the biggest one first. The statement also came with notable context. In the 36 hours before it was issued, the public messaging from Washington had cycled through multiple contradictory positions. No ceasefire at one point, considering winding down 90 minutes later. Peace talks being planned the following morning. And then the 48-hour ultimatum. Senator Chris Murphy stated today that the situation reflects a loss of control, that the escalation is the behavior of a side that is panicking rather than planning. Whether you agree with that characterization or not, the sequence of contradictory statements over 36 hours is observable and documented. What is clear is that the 48-hour ultimatum represents the highest stakes single statement of this entire conflict. And to understand why, you need to understand what targeting power plants actually means and why the specific details of this threat may not work the way the statement implies. The instinct behind threatening a country's power infrastructure is straightforward. Disable the electricity, and you disable everything that depends on it. Hospitals, communications, water pumping, heating, food preservation, military coordination. It is one of the most disruptive things you can do to a modern society short of direct military engagement. But Iran's power grid has a specific characteristic that makes this threat significantly more complicated than it appears. Iran's electricity infrastructure is deliberately decentralized. Rather than relying on a small number of very large facilities that each supply a significant portion of national demand, Iran operates a large number of distributed generating facilities spread across the country. The largest single power plant in Iran supplies approximately 2.9% of total national power generation. Not 20%, not 30%, 2.9%. To understand why that matters, consider the comparison. Israel's largest power plant, Orot Rabin, supplies approximately 20% of Israel's total electricity. A country with one large facility supplying a fifth of its power is significantly more vulnerable to infrastructure targeting than a country where the largest facility supplies less than 3%. Starting with the biggest one first, as the statement specified, would damage Iran's power infrastructure. But it would not collapse it. Replacing 3% of generating capacity while challenging is a very different problem from replacing 20 or 30%. Iran's decentralized grid design means that no single facility, or even several facilities, represents a decisive vulnerability. Iran's engineers appear to have understood for years that its energy infrastructure might be targeted. The decentralization appears to be a deliberate design choice, specifically intended to limit the impact of exactly this type of operation. And Iran's response to the ultimatum today showed that it understands this asymmetry and intends to exploit it. Tell me in the comments, did you know Iran's largest power plant supplies less than 3% of its total electricity? Because when I understood that detail, the entire dynamic of today's ultimatum looked completely different. Within hours of the ultimatum being issued, Iran's military issued its counterstatement. And the counterstatement chose a target category that most people are only beginning to process. Iran stated clearly that if its power plants are engaged, it will target energy infrastructure and desalination plants across the region. The desalination plants were named explicitly alongside energy infrastructure, not as an afterthought but as a named category of response. For people who are not familiar with the Gulf region's water situation, this requires some explanation. Because the desalination threat is not a peripheral concern, it is a threat to the most fundamental infrastructure of human survival. The Gulf region is one of the most water-scarce areas on Earth. Rainfall is minimal. Natural freshwater sources are extremely limited. Decades ago, the Gulf states built a solution to this problem: large-scale desalination facilities that take seawater from the Gulf and process it into drinking water at industrial scale. These facilities are not a supplementary water source. They are the primary water supply. Kuwait obtains approximately 90% of its drinking water from desalination facilities. Saudi Arabia, approximately 70%. The UAE and Qatar are similarly dependent. These numbers are not estimates. They reflect the reality that these countries have built their entire water supply systems around desalination technology, because the natural alternative simply does not exist at the scale their populations require. Targeting desalination infrastructure is therefore categorically different from targeting military installations, energy facilities, or transportation networks. Those disruptions are severe. But disrupting the water supply affects the most basic biological requirement of every person living in the affected area, regardless of their relationship to any government, any conflict, or any military operation. Iran chose this target category deliberately. The message being sent to the Gulf states is direct and explicit. The countries hosting American operations from their territory face consequences that go beyond the military and energy domains. It is a message specifically designed to create pressure on governments from their own populations. And Iran did not stop there. The same statement included threats to undersea internet cables, the physical infrastructure that carries the majority of global internet traffic, and to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the waterway connecting the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. A second maritime corridor, on top of the Strait of Hormuz, potentially disrupted simultaneously. Desalination plants supplying 90% of Kuwait's water and 70% of Saudi Arabia's. Does that change how you understood Iran's counter-threat today? Because this is the part of the story that most coverage is not explaining properly. Tell me your thoughts below. Now let us think about what the 48-hour deadline actually represents in practical terms. A public countdown creates a specific kind of pressure. It is not just a military threat, it is a market event, a diplomatic event, and a civilian planning event simultaneously. Every oil trader in the world is watching the clock. Every government in the Gulf region is calculating its position. Every shipping company is deciding whether to move vessels. Every country dependent on Gulf energy is updating its contingency plans. The financial markets registered this immediately. Bitcoin fell below $68,000 within hours of the statement. Stock markets moved on the announcement, and then moved again when subsequent statements suggested possible de-escalation. The Kobesi letter documented that approximately $900 billion in market cap shifted over the course of a single afternoon based entirely on verbal statements. No actual military events required. That market sensitivity tells you something important about the current state of this conflict. The uncertainty is now so high and the potential consequences so significant that verbal statements alone are moving global financial markets by hundreds of billions of dollars. That is not a normal conflict dynamic. That is a conflict that has reached a scale where every signal is being watched and priced by every major market participant simultaneously. The Strait of Hormuz situation itself adds another layer of complexity to the countdown. Iran has indicated it is prepared to allow neutral countries to pass through. Japan reached an arrangement earlier this week, paying in Chinese yuan rather than dollars. Several other countries are in various stages of negotiation. The strait is not fully closed to everyone, it is selectively closed, with Iran determining who passes and who does not, opening it fully without threat. The exact wording of the ultimatum is a different ask from the current selective access arrangement. Iran's response suggested it is not prepared to meet that specific condition within the time frame specified, which means the 48-hour clock is running toward a decision point that has no clean or easy resolution visible from either side. There are three possible outcomes when the 48-hour clock reaches zero. The first is that Iran opens the strait fully and without conditions. This would allow the US to declare a form of victory and stand down the immediate escalation. Based on everything Iran has communicated today, its counter-threats, its stated ceasefire conditions, its foreign minister's statements about the conflict not being something it is seeking to end, this outcome appears unlikely within the time frame. The second is that the US engages Iranian power plants as stated. This would trigger Iran's stated response, desalination plants, energy infrastructure, potentially undersea cables, potentially a second maritime closure. The cascade of consequences from that scenario is significant and far-reaching, affecting not just the conflict parties but the broader region and global markets. The third outcome is that the deadline passes without the stated action being taken, that the ultimatum becomes a pressure tool rather than a firm commitment, with further negotiation happening behind the scenes. This is the pattern that has characterized several previous statements in this conflict: strong public language, followed by private diplomatic outreach through intermediaries. Which of these three outcomes materializes will be one of the most closely watched moments of this entire conflict. And the answer to that question will tell you more about the actual state of this situation than any number of public statements. But what is your opinion on this? Comment down below. If you are curious to find more, then make sure to click on one of the videos you see on the screen. And with that, we come to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, then turn on the notifications bell on this channel. Also, please share this video with as many people as possible. Let's get this news out there.